Upon popular request, I am finally going to make a video that tells my whole story, how I got into all this, and kind of how I ended up where I am today. I'm going to do it in 3 parts. So the first part, I'm going to talk about what motivated me to get into this and kind of how I got started. The second part, I'm going to talk about a lot of the things that I learned in my first year and all the things that I did wrong. And then in the third part, I'm going to take you through the journey I've had for farming for 8 years and where I've ended up and why I do the things that I do. So in this first part, it's going to be an introduction to how I got into all this. Well, let's go back to where I think the biggest turning point is that when I got into all this stuff. So back in 2008, I was a struggling musician trying to make my way, make a career for myself as a musician. I was more interested in composition. I played in a band called People for Audio, and I studied music composition in college and was trying to make a career for myself as a film composer and playing in bands too and stuff like that. But it is difficult to make a living as a musician, and around 2008 I started to realize that because I'd been at it for like 10 years at this point, and I was sort of burning out on the whole thing. My band was falling apart, and I was, looking at world events. This is when the recession started, and I was starting to really think about what I was doing in my own life, and I wasn't really happy with where I was. I was partying too much, I was doing drugs, and it wasn't a healthy lifestyle. And I was always obsessed, actually very obsessed with sustainability. I used to just watch, in the last 2 years of my music career, I would just watch YouTube videos with Bill Mollison and even Jeff Lawton, and I watched videos with Michael Reynolds talking about Earth ships and stuff like that, and I was really into that kind of stuff, and I, as all my music career was starting to wither out, I started to really think in my mind that this was something that I would want to do. And I wasn't even interested in market gardening at that point. It was more like homesteading style, and I was kind of like, had that attitude like, screw the system, I'm just gonna go off grid and do that whole thing. And that was my original motivation. And so in the winter of 2008, the deep winter, it was like the gnarliest winter I'd ever lived through. We had freezing rainstorms, and my door had been frozen shut, and I started to really wake up to how fragile the food system is, because there was this 3-day period where we had this like crazy freezing rainstorm in Montreal. So Montreal is a very, very cold city in the winter, and we get these warm fronts that come in, and it just rains. Like, it'd be minus 30 degrees Celsius, and it'll be raining, and all that rain will freeze on contact to the road, to the telephone poles, branches fall down. Like, the city was pandemonium. And I remember going to the store there, and there was not a lot of trucks coming in, so there was things missing. Like, it was far from Venezuela as it is today, but it did make me think about how fragile the food system was, and combining that with what I thought at the time was going to be this global economic collapse where the dollar would go to zero and it would be another Great Depression. I was thinking that, holy crap, I have no practical skills. Like, I can edit in Pro Tools, and I can EQ, and I can write compositions on my guitar or piano, but I could not feed myself, and I felt very like disabled in a way. I felt I was terrified of it, basically. And so at that point, I drafted a 5-year plan, and I thought, okay, I'm going to leave Montreal, I'm going to go back out west, and I'm going to go tree planting for another 5 years. So just backing up a little bit, tree planting is a job that I did for almost 10 years, and I put myself through college doing it, and I funded myself to be a working musician in Montreal for all those years, because I could go back out to British Columbia, work for 2 or 3 months, plant a bunch of trees, and make a bunch of money, and then go back and live off that money. And so I did that for quite a long time. And tree planting is a job that you can, if you're good at it, you can make a lot of money at it. I was able to make $500 a day in my last 3 or 4 years of tree planting, and so I could go and make a big chunk of money in a very small period of time, and then go and live what I thought was the dream at that point in Montreal. So anyways, nearing in the winter of 2008. This is around, I left March 2008, but I basically drafted a 5-year plan, and I said I'm going to go tree planting for 5 more years. I'm going to save, I was hoping I could save 20 grand a season, and that would have been ambitious, but I wanted to save a bunch of money, and in 5 years I would have money to go and buy a significant piece of land, or have a down payment to get a significant piece of land and do that whole thing. But going into it, this is the first and second year tree planting, I got really burnt out. But what I did was I made this plan, and my plan was to save money and then educate myself during the winters of all these years, and basically just grind it out for 5 years and save for my dream. And so I went back, did another season of tree planting. I moved back out west at this point, so now I was like sleeping on my mom's couch basically, and did another season of tree planting. And I did a bike tour down the west coast after that season of tree planting. So a friend of mine kind of inspired me to do this, but I loaded up my bike and I rode straight south from Kelowna. I went down Highway 97, then I hit the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon, went to the coast, and then rode straight down all the way to Tijuana. And I visited off-grid homesteads, eco-villages, organic farms, all kinds of stuff like that. And I just wanted to see what people were doing. I was woofing, if any of you are familiar with that. And I didn't really learn a ton about, I didn't really learn anything about farming, to be honest. I just saw what people were doing, and I was inspired by that. But ultimately, I was really motivated to do something when I finished that tour. The biggest takeaway I had on that bike tour is I learned that if you wear your values on your sleeve, in the sense that, like, show a bit of vulnerability, this is who I am, take it or leave it, you will attract the kind of people that you want to talk to. Like, so by putting yourself out there, I've even learned this through doing YouTube content, putting yourself out there, you attract people to you who are like-minded. It's like that old saying, if you build it, they will come. And that was like my biggest takeaway in that trip. And so not only was I motivated to do something after that, I still didn't know what it was going to be, but I felt very capable to do it, because I rode a bike, I think it was 3,000 miles, and I felt super motivated. So anyways, I came back, I did another season of tree planting, 1 more year, and I thought I was going to do 4 more, but there was no way. I was burnt out. My body was just physically wrecked. I had carpal tunnel syndrome in both hands. I had tendonitis in my elbows. There was no way that my body was going to be able to do another season of tree planting, and I was quite burnt out on the whole thing at that point anyways. And so I had some money saved. I still had tons of student debt and all that, but I had some money saved, and I was kind of at this deadlock where it's like, okay, I've been working towards this goal. I'm 2 years into my 5-year plan, and I don't know if I'm going to make it all the way through, because I just don't think I'm able to afford land. Like, it doesn't seem like it's practical, and I can't do this job anymore. And in a way, I'd pigeonholed myself for so many years, because for so many years I'd just done tree planting as a day job, and worked and did as a musician. I barely worked as a musician. I didn't really get paid to do gigs. Well, we did, but we didn't make any money at it. And I felt like, what am I going to do? I have nothing. I have no skills. Like, I was kind of freaking out. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who was a tree planter as well, told me about this thing called spin farming. And spin is an acronym for small plot intensive. It's a farming system. My system is very much based off spin, but it was a guy named Wally Satsowich who created this spin farming system. And I bought his books, and I used his system, and it got me started with my farm. But anyway, so I heard about that stuff, and I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do, because I can farm in people's backyards. I don't need to own land. So I felt like that had this amazing solution. And so at that point, I started looking for lawns to farm in. And I was putting the word out to a bunch of my friends, and a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine, said, hey, my parents own this piece of land. It's right downtown. There's renters in the house, but they don't use the land around it. In fact, they spend money to have somebody landscape it, like mow the lawns and maintain it and all that. And so he saw an opportunity in what I was doing to find a win-win agreement with them. I'll farm the land, I'll take care of it, I'll give them vegetables each week. It's the basis of my whole business still today. And I started with that one plot. So it was a double lot. In total, the two lots combined were a half acre. There was really only about a quarter acre, or actually even less. Maybe there was about a fifth of an acre of production that I had there. I was a front yard, a backyard, and then this side lot. I built a nursery there, and I also rented the garage there and used it as a winter nursery, as well as my kind of post-harvest area, as hack as it was. But that's where I started. So I started developing that plot in the fall of 2009, and built a fence, and I was basically trying to get everything ready to farm at this point. And so it was an exciting time, because I really felt like I had this solution. Like I had a way of getting to my goals without getting there right away. I didn't know if I could make money at it. I was hoping I could, and so I didn't do any farming per se in that fall, but I prepped beds. I did some ridiculous things. Worked so hard, so pointlessly, but I essentially got that site ready to go going into the next spring. One thing I did in that fall, which actually worked out really well for me as sort of like a way to grease the wheels but also get to know customers, is I started a composting program. And so, like, I was green. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know how to do any of this. I was just reading books, watching some YouTube videos, which there wasn't much back then. I was watching John Kohler, like growingyourgreens.com. I love John. He's awesome. I've done a video with him. He was one of my biggest inspirations when I started. And so I was like, I got to figure out how to do stuff. And so I was like, oh, why don't I just make compost for the winter? I had enough money saved up for my tree planting season that I could afford to take the winter off and just study, and then have some cash flow to get things going the next season. And so I started a compost program. I gave 5-gallon ice cream buckets to all my friends and said, save me all your vegetable scraps, and once a week I'll pick them up by bike and I'll compost them at this site. It turned out to be a ton of work. I ended up spending 20 to 30 hours a week doing this, flipping compost and picking up compost. It was really hard, but it's how I got started, and it actually created some buzz. I was on the radio, I was talking to garden clubs, because people were just interested in what I was doing, and the composting thing was sort of a vehicle to get the conversation going. Even though I had no experience farming at that point, I wasn't even technically farming, but it got the conversation going, and that built some momentum and hype that really pushed me well into the next season. And I'm going to end it there, but in the next video I'll talk about all the mistakes that I made in my first year of farming. Talk to you guys later.